You thought everything was going well, the connection was growing, the laughter was real, the vulnerability was beginning to show. But suddenly, they vanished. Not a fight or reason, just distance, cold, silence. And you're left asking yourself, what did I do wrong? Let me tell you something life-changing today. It's not about you. It's about the one emotion that avoidants fear more than anything else. And when they feel it, they disappear. Avoidantly attached individuals don't pull away because you said the wrong thing, wore the wrong expression, or showed too much interest. The truth is far deeper, and it has almost nothing to do with you. They pull away because something inside them gets triggered, something they don't even fully understand. When emotions begin to deepen and connection starts to form, their internal alarm system goes off. That alarm isn't about you. It's about a deep fear of losing control over themselves. The fear of emotional exposure, of letting someone else in too far, too fast, overwhelms them. Vulnerability doesn't feel like closeness. It feels like danger. Imagine their emotional world like a locked vault. When you start to touch those deeper layers, when you're kind, when you're present, when you're emotionally open, it starts to rattle that lock. And for them, that's terrifying. Why? Because deep down, they believe that if they let someone in, they'll be consumed, hurt, abandoned, or made to feel like they're not good enough again. These beliefs don't form out of nowhere. They were built through years of emotional training, often rooted in childhood. Perhaps they were taught that emotions were a weakness, that showing feelings meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. So what looks like avoidance is actually self-protection. When things start to go too well in a relationship, their subconscious kicks in. They might not consciously say, I'm afraid I'll lose myself, but their nervous system screams it. They may suddenly become irritable, emotionally distant, or cold. You'll feel them withdrawing, but you won't get an explanation. That's the pattern: closeness, fear, withdrawal. Not because you're too much, but because they don't know how to be with themselves in the presence of love. And when they feel that rising emotional intensity inside, when they sense the possibility of being seen, they interpret that sensation not as intimacy, but as a threat to their safety and identity. They fear that love will force them to expose parts of themselves they've spent their whole lives hiding. And so they pull away, not because they don't feel anything for you, but because they feel too much and don't know what to do with those feelings. It's not about rejection. It's about emotional overwhelm. And in those moments, the only thing that seems safe to them is distance. Emotional intensity is often mistaken as a beautiful sign of connection, but for someone with an avoidant attachment style, it can feel like stepping into a psychological trap. What feels bonding and nourishing to one person feels suffocating and destabilizing to another. As closeness deepens, avoidants start to sense something they can't always explain. It's like an invisible pressure rising in the background. Their nervous system doesn't interpret that closeness as safe or comforting. Instead, it triggers internal alarms that tell them they're losing control. And when that alarm gets loud enough, their instinct isn't to lean in. It's to pull back fast. To an avoidant, emotional intensity feels like a setup. It reminds them of situations where their boundaries were invaded, where their needs weren't respected, or where love came with strings attached. It touches wounds that were never fully healed. So when a partner starts expressing more affection, when vulnerability starts flowing, when the relationship begins to feel emotionally real, avoidants often start seeing red flags that aren't actually there. It's not sabotage, it's survival. Their mind begins to convince them of stories like, I'm losing myself. They're going to demand too much from me. Or even, I need to escape before this gets dangerous. What's important to understand is that avoidants often don't recognize this response as fear. Instead, they interpret the discomfort as a problem with the other person or with the relationship itself. They might say things like, I just need space, or I'm not sure I'm ready for this, without fully grasping that what they're actually feeling is emotional flooding. Their body wants distance even when their heart may want connection. That internal war is exhausting and most of the fear wins. Even small gestures of intimacy, like consistent texting, deeper eye contact, or expressing emotional needs can feel like intensity to an avoidant. They crave love, but they fear the closeness it requires. That paradox creates a cycle where they start to lean in, feel triggered, and then instinctively retreat. They don't mean to confuse or hurt anyone. It's just that the intensity feels like they're being pulled into something they can't control. They fear losing their emotional independence, or worse, being emotionally consumed. So instead of staying present, they detach. Not because they don't care, but because caring too much feels threatening to the fragile balance they've created within themselves. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, emotional closeness doesn't register as soothing, it registers as danger. This isn't just a psychological reaction, it's a nervous system response. Their body interprets intimacy as a threat long before their conscious mind understands why. When someone starts to get close, it activates a defense system that was built long ago, often in childhood, when closeness was either inconsistent, unsafe, or simply not available. Over time, they learn to associate emotional dependence with pain, disappointment, or suffocation. So now, as adults, even in relationships with safe and loving people, their nervous system still operates by those old rules. This is why avoidance can seem calm on the surface, but internally, they may be flooded with discomfort as intimacy increases. The closer someone gets, the more they feel exposed, and the more their nervous system screams for escape. It's not a matter of logic. It's instinctual. While someone securely attached might feel a deepening sense of trust when love starts to grow, the avoidant often experiences an urge to retreat. Their system is wired for protection, not connection. This doesn't mean they're incapable of love. It means that love, in its purest form, feels foreign and unstable to their internal world. You can often see this reaction in small moments. A deep conversation that feels connecting to one partner may feel suffocating to an avoidant. An affectionate gesture might be misery as clinginess. Even eye contact can feel too intense when emotional walls begin to drop. These aren't just preferences, they're symptoms of a nervous system that has been programmed to fear emotional intimacy. The avoidant may not even be fully aware of it, but their body is telling them, run now, protect yourself, don't let them into deep. Because of this, they often feel safest when there's just enough distance to stay in control. Once emotional closeness crosses that invisible threshold, their internal alarms go off and their behavior begins to shift. Sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. They might cancel plans, become emotionally cold, or suddenly claim they're confused about the relationship. But underneath that behavior is a nervous system doing what it was conditioned to do, survive closeness by avoiding it. Until they learn to rewire their internal safety system, intimacy will always feel threatening, no matter how good their partner's intentions are. When a relationship starts to feel emotionally fulfilling, many people assume it's a sign of success, of connection deepening, of love blossoming. But for an avoidantly attached individual, this can actually be the tipping point where things begin to feel good too fast and ultimately too dangerous. As strange as it sounds, when things are going smoothly, that's exactly when avoidants often begin to feel the most pressure. It's not that they don't want the love. They often do. But love, especially when it starts to feel emotionally intense and consistent, brings with it an unspoken expectation to show up emotionally, consistently, and with vulnerability. That expectation for someone with an avoidant attachment style can feel like being handed a heavy weight they were never trained to carry. They may not consciously say, I feel pressure to be emotionally available, but that's exactly what starts to happen under the surface. The relationship begins to ask them to be present, to be open, to engage deeply. And in their mind, that equates to losing control. Avoidants have often survived by staying self-contained and emotionally independent. So when love starts asking them to reciprocate, it can feel like a demand rather than an invitation. This pressure doesn't always come from the partner. Often, it's self-imposed. The avoidant feels they should be doing more, saying more, feeling more, but they don't know how. And that gap between what they believe is expected of them and what they feel capable of delivering creates a rising anxiety. Rather than risk disappointing someone or worse, of being exposed for what they believe are their emotional shortcomings, they pull back. The more emotionally available you are, the more emotionally inadequate they may begin to feel, and that creates a painful inner pressure to either perform or withdraw. This is where the inner conflict begins. The desire to stay and connect is there, but so is the urge to flee. The avoidant doesn't want to hurt the other person, but they also don't want to drown in emotional expectations they never learned to meet. So their nervous system does what it's always done. When under stressing, it shuts down, pulls away, and seeks space. Not because the connection isn't real, but because they feel incapable of rising to the level of emotional engagement that love, in its healthiest form, naturally invites. And that internal pressure becomes too heavy to bear. For avoidantly attached individuals, independence isn't just a preference. It's a survival strategy. It's their emotional armor, the foundation of how they've learned to stay safe in a world that once felt unpredictable or emotionally unsafe. From a young age, many avoidants were conditioned to believe that depending on others was dangerous or disappointing. Maybe their caregivers were emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, critical, or even intrusive. So they adapted. They became self-reliant. They taught themselves not to need anyone because needing someone meant risking being let down or controlled. As a result, independence became not just a value, but a core identity. Their sense of safety, worth, and emotional control became deeply tied to how well they could manage life without needing emotional support from others. Over time, they learned to find pride and even comfort in that emotional distance. It allowed them to function, to stay in control, to avoid the vulnerabilities that come with being close to others. But here's where the conflict begins. So humans are wired for connection. And deep down, avoidants want love too. They want intimacy, partnership, and safety. but only on their terms, where independence remains fully intact the moment someone starts to get close. Emotionally, psychologically, or physically, the avoidant begins to feel like that independence is under threat, not because their partner is doing something wrong, but because emotional intimacy feels like an invitation to surrender control. And for the avoidant, control is synonymous with safety. When someone starts to rely on them emotionally, or when they start to feel their own emotions getting activated by love, their internal dialogue becomes loud. I'm losing myself. I can't breathe. I'm not safe. That fear of being engulfed, of being trapped or emotionally controlled leads them to retreat. Even simple relationship dynamics can trigger this response. A partner who wants to spend more time together, who seeks emotional closeness, or who expects vulnerability can unintentionally activate the avoidance defense system. To the avoidant, these natural relationship needs feel like demands. The fear is that closeness will come at the cost of their identity, their space, or their emotional self-sufficiency. And so they armor up, they detach, they distance themselves, not because they don't care, but because caring feels like a risk to their hard-earned independence. This armor keeps them feeling safe, even though it often pushes away the very connection they deeply crave. For individuals with an avoidant attachment style, the concept of having needs, especially emotional ones, isn't just uncomfortable. It can feel threatening. Many avoidants grew up in environments where expressing needs led to rejection, punishment, ridicule, or emotional withdrawal. As a result, they learned early on that needing someone wasn't safe. Depending on others made them vulnerable, and vulnerability was met with pain. Over time, this conditioning hardwired a message into their subconscious. Having needs means you're weak, and expressing those needs makes you a target. So they adapted in the only way that felt safe. They shut their needs down. The survival mechanism doesn't disappear in adulthood. Instead, it shows up in their relationships in subtle and powerful ways. When a partner expresses a need, whether it's the need for reassurance, consistency, more time, or emotional support, the avoidant doesn't just hear the request. Their nervous system interprets it as a threat. It reminds them of those moments in the past when needs created conflict, abandonment, or shame. So rather than leaning in, they pull away. Rather than responding with empathy, they may shut down emotionally or become defensive. It's not they don't care about their partner. On the contrary, many avoidants feel deep things beneath the surface. But the moment they feel like someone else's needs might require something of them, something emotional, something vulnerable, they go into protection mode. They may start to perceive the relationship as demanding, overwhelming, or even suffocating. The more the partner asks for emotional presence, the more the avoidant feels the walls closing in. And since they haven't been taught health ways to meet emotional needs, either their own or someone else's, they revert to what they know best: distance, silence, or avoidance. Even their own internal needs are often buried. Avoidants are highly skilled at suppressing what they feel, convincing themselves they're fine on their own, and dismissing emotional hunger as unnecessary or irrational. But deep within, the needs still exist. They still long to be seen, understood, and loved. The tragedy is that they often know how to access those needs safely. So when someone else brings their needs to the table, the avoidant feels overwhelmed. It's like holding a mirror to the very part of themselves they've tried to ignore. This is why relationships with avoidance can feel so confusing. You might be asking for something completely reasonable, like more connection, clarity, or affection, and instead of getting a response, you get distance. Not because you're asking too much, because to them, any emotional need feels like a reminder of past pain. They equate needs with danger, and that belief shapes how they show up in love. Shame is one of the most powerful yet invisible forces operating beneath the surface of an avoidantly attached person. It's not loud or obvious. It doesn't shout or announce itself. Instead, it whispers silently in the background of their psyche, shaping how they see themselves, how they interpret love, and how they react when someone begins to care for them. For the avoidant, shame often sounds like, I'm not good enough, I'm too much, I'm not lovable, or, most painfully, if they really knew me, they'd leave. These thoughts aren't always conscious, but they drive much of their behavior in relationships. When someone starts to genuinely love an avoidant, when they see the avoidant's goodness, when they offer acceptance, when they care without conditions, it's not always received with warmth. Often, it's received with discomfort, and that discomfort is rooted in shame. The avoidant doesn't feel worthy of that love. Deep down, they believe there's something fundamentally flawed about them, something unlovable. So when love does show up, it doesn't feel safe. It feels suspicious, or worse, unbearable. The emotional distance between being loved and feeling unworthy creates an internal crisis. And the easiest way to resolve that tension: pull away. It's not that they want to reject love. It's that love feels like it's shining a spotlight on all the parts of themselves they've been trying to hide. Avoidants often grow up having to manage emotions on their own, learning that expressing pain, sadness, or vulnerability made them a burden. Over time, they buried those parts of themselves, but when someone tries to love them deeply, those buried parts start to stir. Love threatens to unearth the parts they've kept hidden, even from themselves, and with that exposure comes shame. This shame doesn't just affect how they receive love, it affects how they give it. They may hold back affection, withhold their thoughts, or struggle to express what they feel. Not because they don't have emotions, but because they're terrified that showing those emotions will lead to rejection. They fear being too much or not enough. So instead of leaning into connection, they armor up, they shut down, they ghost, they become cold, not because they don't care, but because their shame convinces them that you'll eventually see who they really are and walk away. So they leave first, or they sabotage what's good before it has a chance to turn bad. This is the tragedy of avoidant shame. It makes love feel dangerous, even when it's exactly what they need most. Avoidants don't always argue, shout, or cause dramatic scenes when things get emotionally difficult. More often than not, they go silent. That silence isn't empty. It's loaded with meaning, emotion, and self-protection. It's how they communicate when they don't have the words or when words feel too risky to the outside world or to their partner. That silence may feel cold, indifferent, even cruel. But for the avoidant, it is a coping mechanism. It's the only way they know how to manage emotional intensity when it becomes too overwhelming to process or express. Many avoidants grew up in environments where emotions were either ignored, punished, or met with rejection. In such households, expressing pain or vulnerability wasn't met with comfort. It was met with discomfort or even emotional neglect. So over time, they learned that silence was safer. If they didn't speak up, they wouldn't be judged. If they didn't express their feelings, they wouldn't be vulnerable to attack. This survival tactic became a default communication style. And now, in adult relationships, when conflict arises or emotions run high, when they instinctively shut down instead of lean in, when an avoidant partner becomes quiet or withdraws, it's often misunderstood as disinterest or lack of care. But inside, they may be feeling a storm of emotions they don't know how to process. Fear, shame, confusion, inadequacy. They may genuinely care deeply, but the moment they feel overwhelmed, their body signals to retreat. It's not an intentional punishment. It's a protective reflex. Silence in their world equals control. It's a way to avoid saying something they might regret or avoid being dragged into an emotional space they don't feel equipped to navigate. This silent mode also allows them to regain a sense of safety. They need distance to regulate. It's not uncommon for avoidants to disappear emotionally, sometimes even physically, when their internal system is overloaded. They might stop responding to texts, avoid meaningful conversations, or become emotionally unavailable for long stretches. It's not because they've stopped feeling. It's because feeling too much threatens their emotional structure and silence gives them breathing room. Ironically, their silence often causes more harm than good. It leaves their partners feeling abandoned, confused, or unloved, when in fact the avoidant may be silently screaming inside, but they've never been taught how to put that into words. So they suffer in silence, and the relationship suffers too, not because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of safe tools to express it. One of the most misunderstood truths about avoidant attachment is that timing, emotional timing, matters more than anything else. Avoidants are not emotionally dead or incapable of connection. In fact, many of them crave love. But the key difference lies in how they respond to the pace and pressure of emotional intimacy. If they sense that they're being pushed to open up too quickly or expected to reciprocate vulnerability before they feel safe, their system automatically resists. It's not personal. It's protection. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the speed at which things are moving because it threatens their sense of control. Avoidants operate with an internal emotional speed limit. When a partner comes on too strong emotionally, no matter how well-intentioned, it can feel like their autonomy is being stripped away. That triggers deep-seated fears of enmeshment, of being consumed by the relationship, of losing themselves. Even if they're in love, even if they genuinely care, too much too soon can send them into retreat. Emotional acceleration doesn't create connection for an avoidant. It creates panic. That's why trying to fix it with more effort, more affection, or more pursuit almost always backfires. The harder you chase, the faster they run. The breakthrough comes when you stop chasing and start healing. When you take a step back, not as a game or strategy, but from a place of genuine self-worth and emotional clarity, you create the very thing avoidants need most: space. And in that space, something powerful happens. They begin to feel safer. The pressure lifts. The fear of being consumed lessens. And with less pressure, they can begin to reflect. They can feel your absence and miss your energy, not because you were demanding it, but because you stopped giving it freely. Avoidants tend to come back not when you demand it, but when you embody your own emotional independence. This doesn't mean becoming cold or punishing. It means becoming whole. The more grounded, calm, and self-connected you are, the less threatening you feel to their nervous system. You stop being a source of emotional urgency and become a source of emotional safety. And for the avoidant, safety is what allows them to re-enter the emotional space at their own pace. They can't be pulled forward, but they can be drawn in, slowly, gently, and without pressure. That's the timing they need to feel free enough to stay. Healing avoidant attachment isn't about labeling someone as damaged or trying to fix them. It's about understanding where their behavior comes from. It starts with awareness, not blame. Avoidants aren't heartless, cold, or incapable of love. They're people who adapted to emotional pain in the only way they knew how, by pulling away, by shutting down, by building walls so thick they no longer remembered what it felt like to be safe in someone else's presence. And that adaptation didn't happen in a vacuum. It was shaped by early relationships, by unmet needs, and by environments that taught them closeness equals danger. Blaming an avoidant for how they protect themselves only deepens the cycle of disconnection. When you make their detachment a personal attack, when you try to force them to change through guilt or pressure, it reinforces their fear that closeness is unsafe. That's why awareness is the gateway to healing for both them and for you. When you can understand that their distance comes fear, not cruelty, it shifts the emotional dynamic. You stop seeing them as emotionally unavailable villains and start seeing the wounded parts they don't know how to reveal. This doesn't mean tolerating behavior that hurts you or staying in unhealthy cycles. Boundaries are crucial, but the more you understand the why behind their reactions, the more power you have to respond from strength instead of reactivity. You can say, I see this pattern. I won't chase, but I won't abandon myself either. That self-awareness becomes a mirror, and avoidants need that mirror. They need safe, grounded people who don't demand their vulnerability, but make space for it to emerge at its own pace. For avoidants themselves, healing begins when they realize they're not broken. The way they detach, withdraw, or go silent isn't a personality flaw. It's a trauma response. And trauma can be healed, but it starts with learning to sit with discomfort, to feel instead of flee, to challenge the stories that say, love will always trap me, or I'll never be enough. It means daring to believe that they can need others and stay free, that they can be seen and still be safe. Awareness is the beginning of all transformation. When we stop blaming avoidants and start understanding them, when avoidants stop blaming themselves and start being curious about their own responses, healing becomes possible. And through that healing, real connection can grow. Not forced, not chased, but chosen, moment by moment, safely. The journey into the mind and heart of someone with avoidant attachment is a painful paradox. They long for love, but the very act of receiving it triggers a deep-seated fear. What often appears cold distance or disinterest is rarely about a lack of feeling. It's about emotional overwhelm. Avoidants don't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because they care more than they know how to handle. Their nervous system isn't wired to embrace emotional intensity. It's wired to survive. Every step toward closeness threatens the fragile inner balance they've constructed to keep themselves emotionally safe. Understanding this changes everything. When we stop taking their withdrawal personally and start seeing it as an unconscious protective response, we shift from reactivity to empathy. That doesn't mean we excuse harmful behavior or deny our own needs. It means we lead with insight. We stop trying to crack their shell with force and instead create an atmosphere where vulnerability feels safe. Healing avoidant dynamics is not about fixing or forcing. It's about creating the space for natural trust to take root. Trust for avoidance is not given quickly. It must be built slowly, patiently, without pressure. And yet, the work isn't only about them. It's also about us. In relationships with avoidant individuals, we're often faced with our own fears, the fear of being abandoned, rejected, or unloved. When we chase avoidance, we usually do so from our own wounds. The more we heal our own attachment triggers, the more we can respond to their patterns with grounded awareness rather than emotional urgency. It's not about proving our worth or convincing them to stay. It's about embodying a level of self-respect and emotional maturity that inspires safety, not fear. Ultimately, avoidants don't heal through being chased. They heal through being seen, without judgment, without pressure, and without conditions. When they encounter someone who honors their boundaries while remaining emotionally present, it opens the door to a new kind of connection. One that doesn't force closeness but welcomes it. One that allows love to emerge slowly in its own time. And in that slow, safe unfolding, avoidants can finally begin to go of the armor and step into something they've always wanted, but never believed was possible: true emotional intimacy. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this message. If this resonated with you, if you saw yourself or someone you love in these words, know that you're not alone. Healing avoidant attachment isn't easy, but awareness is the first powerful step toward transformation. The more we understand ourselves and each other, the less we rely on blame, and the more we move into compassion, strength, and emotional freedom. Whether you're healing from an avoidant pattern or loving someone who pulls away, remember, you don't have to chase love to deserve it. The most powerful thing you can do is return home to yourself. You are worthy of love that feels safe, steady, and true. And it starts with how you show up for you. If this video brought you clarity or comfort, I invite you to like, share, or subscribe to help more people heal through awareness. Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. I love to hear your story. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and most of all, stay true to who you really are. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.